We have Daniel, who is calling in from South Carolina. Daniel, you are live on Talk Heathen. What's going on?
I just want to test my mic. It's loud enough?
I can hear you. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Yeah, I was calling in. I'm surrounded by, a variety of theists and a theist myself, and we have different opinions from person to person. So, like, I understand that atheists see a lot of problems with the theist community, and I just want to say that, we see those problems too. We just want to deal with them in different ways. We're more interested in like cultural shifts and updating belief rather than just completely destroying it.
Daniel, that might be where you are at and with some of the Christians that are in your community. But do you recognize that different Christians have different concerns when it comes to biblical issues? Do you recognize that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I'm talking about,
right.
Me and my little group.
Yeah. You called, in the description that the call screener put, is that most of our callers are just cite scripture, but the Bible is a living Bible, and you wanted to know what our criticisms of the living Bible were. Before we answer that question, I want to know what your understanding of the living Bible is.
Okay, well, I actually, what I meant was that with the hosts, people call in about the Bible, and it tends to be like, in this scripture, it says something that's wrong, and this one, it says that's wrong, and then they try to tie people to those specific scriptures. Living Bible is, and that might be unfair, but the Living Bible is just the idea that we're like constantly writing the Bible, and the people who wrote it were not perfect, so they were just going based on the information they had.
Is it your understanding, therefore, that the Bible is a collection of stories that are attempting to provide guidance to the community that would read it, and that it's got some good stuff, it's got some bad stuff, it's got some accurate stuff, it's got some inaccurate stuff, and that it's not divinely inspired?
Yeah, well, everything up to divine inspiration. The key argument between theists and atheists that I'm interested in is that people, they have this intense feeling that they are connected with God, and some people say, well, this guy is full of it. That doesn't mean anything. But this guy, I really think he's onto something. And, people are going to write down their ideas. And sometimes, you have to kind of pick and choose what you think is divinely inspired.
Yeah, that's dangerous though, right? Because there are probably some white supremacists that think that those passages that say you can take slaves is divinely inspired, and those parts that say that Jesus is, meek and mild servant of man is just human beings being wishy-washy about it. And you could have the opposite position. I think our issue with the Bible is that there's some stuff that we find still works, some stuff that we find does not work. And because people can kind of just pick and choose, it's as good as just starting from scratch and picking the things that work. So societally speaking, I think that's our position. But something you said early on, I want to put a pin in it and just make sure that you understand this. You had said, I guess you were talking about a hypothetical atheist reacting to some believer who said that they have a personal relationship with God, and that means nothing because there's nothing to it. I wouldn't be that person who would say that means nothing or there's nothing there. I would say that people have experiences, people have meaning in their life, And although I might not agree with the ontological reality, the metaphysical substrate of what that belief is, I believe people have experiences. People have things that are meaningful to them. And that's important to me, that we acknowledge that people have experiences, that they have values, that they have things that are important, and that we acknowledge that when we engage in dialogue, because I can't just bulldoze over someone's belief in Allah and expect them to thank me for it. What I have to do is acknowledge it and then sort of pick around the edges to figure out where the edges are and where the common ground is, so we can have a conversation. So that hypothetical atheist, I would say that straw man atheist, if you want, I'm just as uninterested in having a conversation with that atheist as I am talking to some shitlord theist who calls the show.
Well, yeah,
but that's not what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at atheism, I think it just kind of has a tendency to draw more intellectual people, and like just raw atheism doesn't necessarily like rule out like white supremacy or just
No.
I don't know, less informed beliefs. We're dealing with people at the end of the day, and some people are just going to be more simple-minded and less educated, I guess, because the more you get sophisticated understanding of the inner workings of society, the less you're going to think of solutions like discrimination and segregation as solutions to like major societal problems, or like viable solutions to really anything.
I think I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would go even further and say I don't think you need any interpretation of the Bible, living or otherwise, to do that either, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of like what you were saying about ontology, if you look at something like the center of gravity of an object, it's like part of an object, but it might not be on an object. And when you think about like divine inspiration, it's kind of the same thing. People like to think that they're more than themselves, so they'll take something like divine peace and apply that to themselves, and they'll use Jesus as a metaphor for that, and it just feels like they have a lot more creativity to like delve into when they're not just kind of stuck on their physiology.
I mean, that's
Dan.
Like, what is the chemical?
Look, let's say that's true.
I can answer.
Can I take this one, Johnny? I mean, like, let's think, like,
please do.
The principles of look, like, you can intellectualize your divine inspiration. If I say, look, I can own other people because the divine inspiration says I can, I mean, it's just as good. I mean, how is that any different of a justification? Like, I understand the consequences are abhorrent, but if we're talking about the justification there, right? If we're talking about, source, if we're claiming it to be the same, like, it doesn't get us anywhere. It doesn't advance us in any way.
But Dan, I keep on ramming heads with you here. I don't think he's saying that. I'm not being Mr. Softy. I'm not being good cop here, folks at home. Okay, I promise you, I'm not. But I don't think that our caller is saying that. You're talking about metaphors, right? I love metaphors. What drew me to religion in college was myth, not the actual truth value of the statements. Because I think there is a value when you're talking about. Say again?
That's the whole idea. We don't know if they're metaphors or not, and that's why it's so. So another thing I wanted to mention
but Dan, before we get to that part, I want to address what you said, because I already like just slapped Dan in the face by disagreeing with him, and I have to account for myself. Otherwise, Dan's never going to want to do a show with me again.
That's right.
But yes, see, so you talk about like having some sort of, what was the phrase you talked about, being inspired, some sort of creativity? What was the phrase you said before Dan addressed it? What was it? I want to make sure I get it right.
I just gave a metaphor that gravity is a part of an object, but it's not necessarily inside the object. So,
Okay.
you know, creativity.
Okay. I think I know where it was.
Think of it as something necessarily.
Okay.
Right? It might be like based on a symbol like Jesus and
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got me there. Thank you, Dan.
I think you get the general idea.
I do. I think that my personal experience, and probably Dan's experience, and a lot of other atheists, is that we don't solely think about ourselves as a pile of chemicals or a simple biological organism. I mean, we acknowledge that that's the reality, but on some other level, we are interactive beings. We are beings in time and space. We are brothers, sisters, siblings, children, and parents. And we are creators of things. And you talk about, maybe looking outside ourselves for creative or peace or something like that. And you might use Jesus or God as an image of that. Non-believers might look at our relation of ourselves to society, to the human race, to life itself, as a kind of way to get out of our simple biological limitations. Luminous beings are we, rather than merely piles of chemicals, not this crude matter. And so it's as a metaphor, it works, but I don't actually think that I am humanity. But that's how I get outside myself. It's not merely an ego-based drive that I have. I'm stepping outside of myself and looking at my place in a greater whole. But that's metaphorical. It's not.
But what I'm trying to explain is it might be something like physiological in the atmosphere of like a human being's surroundings that like literally kind of contributes to their consciousness, their reasoning. Like they're literally not only themselves, but there is something larger, like a spirit, that we just don't have a good understanding of.
Is it logical?
For example, in the theist community, I would like to see people investigate that using better instrumentation rather than completely relying on faith. Although I do think that faith plays a strong role in kind of like bringing that out of your atmosphere.
I mean, okay, so if I could address this right, like, is it logical? Maybe. Is it reasonable though? I don't think so, because let's talk about this, right? Well, from my perspective, and I think from Johnny's perspective, what we're observing here is a cultural institution. It is a human created ideal, right? It's the exact same thing as calling myself an American. Look, there's people in this country who will cry at the sight of the American flag, that will cry when they look at U.S. veterans saluting, right? And think about their patriotism and think about this greater part of a whole that they've been inculcated in literally since birth. We define American citizenship as being born in this country. And that's something that is completely socially constructed, right? I don't think there's anybody that's going to say, maybe there's some people that would say, oh, this is some sort of divine platonic ideal of being an American. That's something that human beings made. And yet we act on that assumption all the time. We find justification in ourselves doing actions, and even in our own personal narrative sometimes. Like Americans will sometimes say, yeah, we won World War II. I didn't do shit for World War II. You know what I mean? But like that cultural narrative is so large that we even include ourselves sort of in that plural. In the same way with Christianity, right? You can do the same thing. You can look at what inspires you, what your institutions value at the same time. And that's great. And that's fine. That's dandy. But in the same way that being an American and American citizenship and this idea of America has led to the colonization of indigenous people, the institutions that have prevented Black people from having equal standing in this country, a whole less of litany of problems. The same thing can be said of Christianity, right? And the same thing can be said of any world religion. You can name the atrocities all day, but that justification, what at the end of the day, what I want to point out, isn't reasonable to use, isn't what we should be hanging our hats on. I think we should be looking at this a bit differently. I don't know if my answer made sense, but
No, when you look at like slavery, right, and you talk about the Living Bible, I mean, there are a lot of nasty people in Christianity, and I really don't want to lend any like support or encouragement to them. So when I'm dealing with an atheist and they're talking about this stuff, I'm like, you know, I understand that my participation in Christianity might help these people to feel empowered, and I don't like that. So it's like hard for me to call myself a Christian. If I'm being real, you know, I've gained so much from Christian philosophy and theology that it's kind of like disrespectful to just say, no, I'm not a Christian. And it might, when it comes to faith, that might be something that we genuinely need.
I don't think you owe anybody anything. I don't think you.
Daniel, I think what you've done. I think what you've done. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. But I just did, and so I'm just going to go with it. I'm sorry, Daniel, but it's a delay. I think what you've done is you have taken the best parts. I would say what you've taken is the most humane, humanist parts of the Bible, the most compassionate, humanist parts of the Christian philosophy, and you've internalized it, and you've taken it and you've run with it. And when you see the other parts that are just as much there in Christian theology, and it's not limited to Christian. A lot of people are like, oh, they come down on Christianity so hard. Yeah, Islam's just as bad, and there's other religions that are just as bad, if not worse, in certain regards. You've taken the good stuff and you've externalized the bad stuff, and you're, I think, struggling with the bad stuff, but you need to understand that it's kind of part of a package, right? You can not have the bad stuff and just focus on the humanist parts. You're going to probably give up some of the more ethereal, non-corporeal, spiritual stuff, but you can also let compassion and common humanity and a love of life and living things be your group, be your in-group, and still keep all of the good things you've gotten, but you're not going to have any kind of, I think, justification for believing that those non-corporeal existences. Say again? Sorry.
We can agree on that, right? And
what can we agree?
Christianity and Islam not going anywhere. You need sects of these religions that are like living sects that have positive values that draw people in and don't lend credence to the dangerous extremes.
Yes. I agree.
Like,
I want to.
Religion is not.
But you know, Daniel,
a difficult thing to do.
You know, Daniel, I would say that the progresses that Christianity has made is because of humanism, because of the Renaissance era forward. You know what I mean? It wasn't because of the ideals of the ancient peoples that practiced it first. It's the development, it's the progress that's been made. Because if we took the Christians that lived 2,000 years ago and stuck them in America today and asked them to have a conversation with the Christians around here, I guarantee you they would find differences, right? It's because of that progressive, often most of the time secular development of the religious ideals that has come to where we see Christianity today. Sorry, Daniel, it's a little hard to hear you. I know we said we could hear you earlier, but you are a little bit low. So if you could speak up, that'd be great.
Okay, if we went back like 2,000 years, we might find people who, probably the majority of people, we'd think, wow, these people are like barbaric. And on the other hand, there might be a few people who would, even by today's standard, be considered like extremely kind and peaceful. And I mean, that's just my view from traveling the world and meeting people from like demographics that I've been told all my life, like, these are horrible people, but finding like these are the nicest people I've ever met in my life, you know?
Yeah.
Like there's one in every community, and I don't know why in the past it wouldn't be that way.
I agree that there are swell people that exist. like the I don't want to make light of what you're saying, but the grandpa who's handing out Werther's originals
Oh my God.
exists now, and it probably existed 1,000 years ago, handing out, I don't know, some kind of nice candy to the kids and people who are generous and help you get your ox out of the mud, or people who are good Samaritans, to use a biblical image, existed all throughout time. I think cooperation and kindness and compassion has been a key factor in the reason why we live in this world. It's
Yes.
not through sheer competition. This competition's a factor, to be sure.
And you know what, Johnny? That speaks to us being human. That doesn't speak to our religious precepts, right? Like that existed in humanity longer than Christianity has existed, longer than Judaism has existed. So like, if anything, I think that bolsters our point in what we're talking about, right?
What's that? Say that, Daniel. What is thy response to Dan's thing?
It tells children who we are. Like it draws a line back, and like maybe like long ago, like how far back does it go? How important is it? How fundamental is it to like who we are? Like I think 2,000 years ago they would have seen this like almost like neuroscience today.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a question you have to answer for yourself. But I'll tell you what I found the answer to be, because I went through a period of my life, I think I could say it's similar to yours, where I wasn't ready to use the atheist label, but I was ready to use like a progressive Christian label, because I was also embarrassed by the Christianity that I saw happening in the world, and I wanted to disassociate myself from that, but I still felt a cultural connection and ties to that. What I realized was that thing that I felt in me, my own sense of personal ethics, my own sense of morals, is one, a result of the systems around me, but also a result of my own life experiences. And the combination of that has brought me to who I am today. And ultimately, that's always going to be unique. The fact that Christianity may have played a part in it, that didn't mean I have to call myself a Christian. On top of that, there is also historical facts that Christianity talks about. For example, the resurrection of Jesus, that I couldn't actually say I believed anymore. So that also dissuaded me from the label. But the point is, I found myself, I now living comfortably with the label of a secular humanist or a sentientist. And I'm able to be okay. I can still recognize the roots and origins of who I am in my lineage. In that being that, everybody in my family prior to me was probably a Christian. But that doesn't mean I owe them anything. That doesn't mean it would be disrespectful because I dissuade myself of that label. It only means that like we're becoming better. And sometimes that means shedding what we had yesterday into what we can build, today. And to me, that's more important than keeping up a tradition. But we've talked about this for a long time. I think we need to go ahead and wrap this one up, if that's okay with you, Johnny, unless you had something else you want to say there.
Yeah, I guess what I would say, the last thing I would say, but Daniel, what was that?
Can I ask for just one more minute, because I kind of want to push back just to make sure that you don't really miss the important thing in terms of faith that I'm talking about. It's very difficult to be faithful. It's like we have the same issue that atheists have when you sit down and think that faith is actually important to growth. Like every single step, even just beginning to think about it, is difficult. But I think that actually might be something that is necessary to get to where theists want to go in terms of like their personal growth, and understanding reality.
I guess my definition is my question is, what is your definition of faith then?
Like blind faith, like just the idea that you actually need to sit and believe that something is true without any foreknowledge. It's very difficult to think that way, because at its face it seems irrational, but when things start to reveal themselves to you, you feel like, okay, I guess it wasn't that irrational. But every single time you have to start from scratch. The further you get in your understanding of God, it all goes away as soon as you stop being faithful. even for like 1 minute, and you have to start from scratch. Even if
Why do we need that?
That's kind of where we're. Why do we need? Good question, Dan. Why do we need that? Because I don't have that, and I am inspired. I am engaged. I work on things. I feel good, and I don't have. I don't think an irrational belief absent of evidence in anything.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. Like Daniel, like before every flight it takes off in an airport, right? They always do a series of checks to make sure everything is good to go. If I give you the choice between two different flights, one of them saying, yes, we've done all of these checks before we go, and the other one with a pilot that says, no, I'm absolutely sure and have 100% faith that this plane is fine. I mean, which one are you going to trust more? Right? Like, why would you ever go with the person that just has faith? That's not a justification for anything. A lot of people believe a lot of things. Why is that a virtue?
I need to think about this more. I could probably call back. You know, you guys
Music to my
said so
ears.
much and
Yeah.
gave me so much information. I really appreciate it.
Daniel, we
Daniel,
appreciate it too.
We appreciate you. You're doing the Lord's work. No, I'm joking, but you're doing what we want. We want to have these conversations. Again, like it's easy to kind of get set in a paradigm of thought and then assume that certain things are essentials and certain things are extraneous. And I just not with you all the way there. So come back, call back.
Call back.
We'll
Call
be
back.
here.
We
Someone will
appreciate
be
it.
here.